Welcome to the latest edition of Dynamic Political Centrism, hosted by Alan Steinberg, produced by Dr. Yonatan Ioni Yaris.
Our guest tonight, Jeff Tittel, champion for the environment and the recently retired director of the New Jersey Sierra Club.
Good evening and welcome to the Dynamic Political Centrism podcast. I am Alan Steinberg, the voice of Dynamic Political Centrism. Tonight, we are in a situation where we are in a real national chaotic situation. And as such, one of the big casualties of it all is the environment. And that's why the guest that we have tonight is very appropriate. Jeff Tittel, for many years, was the president of the Sierra Club in New Jersey. And I know of no entity that was more dedicated to the environment without having some financial or commercial motive than the Sierra Club. And he established himself there as a leading, not only a political figure, but a leading policy figure, because he had an impact on public policy that I always felt was very beneficial. But he also was an individual and is an individual of very superb political skills. And when I was Region 2 EPA administrator, I made use of his skills in appraising what the prospects would be for any environmental measure, but even more than that, how we would get it done. He's retired now, but he's not retired. He continues to be an active voice for the environment in New Jersey, a very keen insight into the Democratic and Republican Party, but he was a very major player in the Democratic Party for years. So, Jeff, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Now, Jeff, I think that our viewers would benefit from you relating your biography, because your biography takes in political aspects, policy aspects, but also you spent time in California as well. So in a time where nationally we are in a politically chaotic state as well as policy, you bring a lot of perspectives to the issues. So why don't you go ahead and relate to us your biography? We would benefit.
Sure. And because a lot of my life and my childhood has a big impact on me. I came from a family of activists. You know, my grandmother knew Margaret Sanger and helped open the first birth control clinic in Newark. My grandfather was a union organizer. My dad was, also very active in trade union, the anti-war movement, civil rights movement. My dad led the U.S. Steelworkers contingent at the 1963 March on Washington, which I was at as a child. My first protest, I was 4 years old, sitting in a lunch counter in Newark about segregation in the South at a Woolworth. So, and I myself was very active for the first Earth Day. I helped organize all the kids in my junior high to clean up the Elizabeth River. So I was born in Newark and grew up in Hillside. But my family also was involved in a place up in Ringwood called Camp Midvale, and it was started by a group called the Nature Friends, which was an offshoot of the Social Democratic Party in Austria. And the purpose of the place was for people living in industrial society to enjoy nature. And the members were environmentalists and hikers, as well as trade union members. But it was New Jersey's first interracial camp. My family started going up there in 1922 because they allowed Jews in, and a lot of Jews from Newark went up there, and from New York. Naomi Klein, the writer, her grandparents went up there, and her father grew up there. And so it was a place where people like Herschel Bernardi worked as a young man, and Pete Seeger actually lived there at one time, and Ruby Dee and Ozzie Davis were members. But what it gave me was a sense of purpose and value, but also I could be up in Ringwood and I could hike a hill and see for miles, and I could drink the water out of the streams. And I lived on the Newark Hillside border. The stream behind my house, you could throw a match at and watch it flare up. I could write my name on my dad's car when the blast furnace in Irvington was going. So from a young man, I saw the differences between those who had a good environment and those who didn't. That if you tended to be poor or minority or working class, I lived in a working class Jewish neighborhood in part of the Weequahic section, you had one environment and other people had a different one. And so what was great about the camp is that most of the people there came from blue collar backgrounds. In fact, Sheila Oliver family were up there. There were regulars of some of the people you may know. Hetty Rosenstein's also mother used to go there, and she went there as a kid. So that gave me a big sense of purpose. But I was involved in politics when I was a young man. As a kid, one of my best friends' dad was running for mayor of Hillside and handed out flyers. And I got hired by Charlotte DeFilippo, who many people in New Jersey would know, to do flyers for the Democratic Party. And for the first Earth Day, I organized this cleanup, and the principal couldn't get the rakes and shovels for us to clean up the river. And so I went to DeFilippo, who's a Democratic chair, and said, we need to get this stuff. And she said, can the mayor come? And I said, yes. Um, will there be press? They said the Hillside Times will be there. She said, you'll get whatever you need. And that was my first environmental political lesson as a child. And I think it held to me. But I got involved in local politics in Hillside 50 years ago. I got put on the Planning Board and Environmental Commission when I was 18. I was still in high school because of my local activism. And I worked on local campaigns and for people like Alex Menza, who was our state senator. And then I went to college at Rutgers, and I got involved in the '76 presidential campaign and volunteered first and worked for Mo Udall. And after I graduated college in 1980, I went to work for Ted Kennedy, and I ended up in the primaries out in California, where I met the Tom Bradley people, and I got hired by Tom Bradley to work on his mayor's race. I also worked for George Brown, who's a congressman from San Bernardino Riverside, and a lot of other California figures that you would know. And then I came back to D.C. I worked for a while on the Hill, and then went to work for Walter Mondale, who I first met when I interned in the Carter White House in '77. I should have mentioned that. And I worked on his presidential campaign. I was one of his field staff, and I was the deputy field director in California in the general election. And so I built a lot of friends out there and a lot of contacts, and I worked on other campaigns. I don't want to go into too much time, too much
No,
detail.
keep going. This is a really gripping story you have.
So I worked on a lot of different campaigns, and I traveled all over. In fact, I worked on Jerry Springer's campaign for governor until they found out he was writing checks to a house of ill repute. I worked on different campaigns around the country. In '86, I worked for the senatorial campaign committee and did a lot of the challenge races. So I worked on Tom Daschle's race. I worked on Harry Reid's race and many others. And I did a lot of. I went to work for a consulting firm, and I worked for Phil Bredesen, who was the mayor of Nashville, who became governor. And anyway, that all led to me doing work for the UAW and doing direct mail and organizing for them. And I worked for Evan Bayh. And the list is really long. And then ended up being our firm ended up being part of the Clinton campaign in both '92 and '96. I also did John Kerry's direct mail when he ran for Senate. And but after the '96 election, and this is the pivot, I decided to get out of that business and go off and go work for the Sierra Club. But all during that period, I was still active in the environment. I was up in Ringwood, and I would use my family's place up there to get away from DC. What they say about DC in the summertime, it's not the heat, it's the humidity. And so I would like to go up there to kind of chill out. And I got involved in local environmental stuff. And the one big project, and it's was Sterling Forest, where I went to a meeting with a couple of people in New York. There's 5 of us to talk about trying to save Sterling Forest. It was the largest undeveloped tract of land in the New York metropolitan area. It's 22,000 acres. And we started organizing a campaign to save it. And the property got bought by a Swedish conglomerate, Trygg-Hansa, and they also owned a big insurance company in the United States. And who owned the property, and they were going to develop it into a city of 35,000 people. And we spent a lot of years fighting that and fighting them. And I always have to do the story because it became so popular that we had Richard Kiley do a documentary for us. We had Blythe Danner and our daughter Mira Savino at a fundraiser in New York. And then the politicians got involved. And what happened then was Newt Gingrich tried to cut a deal where the developers would be able to get half of the development, half of the 35,000 person city, and the public on a third of the land, and the public would buy the other 2/3 for open space. And I was at a meeting of the executive committee of this group that I helped found, and most of the environmental groups were supporting the deal because they always, I won't go through the names, but every big group you can think of was there and on the other side. And I said that before you can make a decision this big, we have to take it to the members. And they started moving to vote, and I started chanting it and banging on the table. And my friend Andy Lawrence from the New York Sierra Club started chanting and banging on the table. And they were going to call the question, and I jumped up on the table, and then Andy did, and we started jumping up and down and stamping our feet for 40 minutes so they couldn't vote. And what ended up happening, they canceled the meeting. A week later, we voted out most of the executive committee. Both Lautenberg and Bradley had bills to get $35 million from the feds to help save the forest. And we got money from New Jersey. Governor Whitman kicked in $10 million. Doris Duke kicked in $5 million, and so on. New York kicked in, Pataki kicked in $20 million, and we got the first 14,000 acres done. But it wouldn't have happened if I didn't jump up and down. And my point of all that is that you don't sit there in a meeting listening to what the politicians want. You do what's right. And I think the key of Sterling Forest is that we didn't listen to the politicians. We didn't listen to the other environmental groups who just want to be invited to the meeting where they get screwed. We decided to stick to our goals, and we won. And it's now a 22,000 acre state park. And I think I always like to use that story because I think it gives an understanding of my background, but also why I get so tired of the environmental movement that just sits around and takes whatever. We have to create and make our victories, and we have to push for our goals. And anyway, I think that kind of covers really my philosophy of life and how I got there.
Well, here's what I find. I find a number of facets about your bio interesting, but there's one thing in particular. You talk about the early days.
Mm-hmm.
I was in college from 67 to 71. At that time, the Vietnam War was raging. So it was one of two very major liberal cause arenas.
Mm-hmm.
One was the Vietnam War and our foreign policy in general, but mostly the Vietnam War.
Right.
And the other was the civil rights movement. Now, I remember when the environmental movement was coming to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
It was coming to fruition around 1970. That was the first time. And I was at a politically active school. I was at Northwestern, which had a lot of political ferment. But I remember it was just coming on then. And the thing that I have often wondered, and I say this in an admiration way concerning you, I don't think that your particular field had the resources at the beginning to wage battles effectively. Over time, you did. You raised money, you build political relationships. But I always had a sense, and I said this sympathetically about the environmental movement, that at the very beginning it was hard because you were competing with a lot of other liberal causes. Am I wrong or right about that?
I think you're right. I mean, one of the things that did hurt the movement was, Walter Reuther had given a lot of money towards the environmental movement for the first Earth Day, and then he died. So they lost one of the funding sources that they actually had. But there was a part of it that was an activism, and it was very grassroots. And I think that's what the environmental movement needs to go back to that. We did teach-ins. So in 1971, and I was a kid, we did teach-ins where at all those colleges where we went there to learn how to organize. And also we were taught how to identify pollution and how to report it. In 72, I think this is one of the real keys to the whole movement. In 1972, Nixon vetoed the Clean Water Act. And in October, 250,000 people showed up at the Capitol, and 25,000 people stayed to lobby all week. And that week, the Senate overturned the president's veto 94-2. And that's because we had a mass movement, we had a local movement, we went to our senators. We also did something called the Dirty Dozen back there, where we targeted the members of Congress that were, I was a kid, but this is how I learned my skills. They targeted the members of Congress, and they actually defeated 7 out of the 12, including the majority whip of the House at that time, who was a very powerful congressman from Maryland and a Democrat. And I think those are the lessons. And, the other person who I'll mention, he passed recently, that I learned a lot from was Ed Lloyd. Ed founded New Jersey Perkin and Rutgers Environmental Law Clinic. And the other part that I learned in that period because I helped identify the sources of pollution on Elizabeth River when they did the walkthroughs and after the Clean Water Act to identify places that needed permits. But the environmental movement then, it was multifaceted. So you had your local grassroots movement, you had the students, you had the local activists in town, you had people fighting to clean up a park or a toxic site, or fighting a development or a highway. Fighting highways was big. I really got involved in fighting Route 78 back when I was.
What about Route 55 in New Jersey?
Well, yeah, 78 too is going through the Watchung
Right.
Reservation, and yes, 55 too, which we stopped, and many other roads, and anyway, so that was, so we had to learn it. But so it was grassroots activism, but we also had science and technical skills and lobbying and legal skills and political skills. It was a multifaceted piece, and I think that's what people don't understand. We went door to door canvassing, but we also wrote reports based on science. We also lobbied the legislature or Congress, and we've kind of given up on that, where it seems like it's more foundation driven. It's more, I call today, I call them Zoom chair warriors. What they sit around, and do Zoom meetings instead of doing activism. And the years ago, another thing I was proud of was that the Press of Atlantic City called me the activist. And I think that's what we need if we want to, especially now with the threats of Donald Trump and his rollbacks of environmental protections, is that we have to get to that activism that we had, but it has to be based on science and organizing at local levels, at state levels, at the national level. We're not going to be able to hold off what he wants to do, which is destroy the planet, unless we really get back to our basics, is what the things that we learned back in the 70s.
Let me give you my outlook on the immediate consequences of Trump and his anti-environmentalism and what I'm fearful that may follow.
Mm-hmm.
I think right now they're trying to eviscerate EPA. They're they're talking about, then Lee Zeldin is the worst EPA administrator I've ever seen. I can say that very early on.
Oh, yeah.
Because even the environmental officials that Reagan hired, they weren't bad. They were not as pro-environment as you or I would have liked, but they didn't set out to do damage to the environmentalist cause.
Right.
Lee Zeldin is out to do damage, but not only that, the threat, I don't think it's a threat. I think they're going to do this. They want to reduce the workforce at EPA by 2/3.
Right.
I'm afraid that that's going to be a copycat for various environmental agencies in other states to do the same thing. But then what I fear, and I'm curious as to your perspective on this, they are, at the beginning, they're just out to eviscerate the department, okay, or the agency.
Mm-hmm.
I think eventually they're going to start going through the regulations one by one and really eliminate a lot of these regulations. The one thing that will hold them back is that I think the Democrats will capture the House next year, and that will keep them from repealing a lot of the acts like the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and legislation of that sort. But I think first comes the elimination of people. Next comes the elimination of regulations. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I just want to touch on Reagan. Reagan started out bad. They wanted to do Gorsuch, remember, wanted to do the ships burning toxic waste off the coast of New Jersey, and then he sacked her and he brought in Ruckelshaus, who was always a decent environmentalist.
I remember the days of Rita Lavelle, too.
Yeah, right. And so, he learned. I just wanted to make sure you understood that he grew. The problem with Trump is he doesn't grow. 8 years ago, when he got elected, he cut 125 rules, rolling back Clean Water Act, wetlands, toxic stop. He put a freeze on cleaning up Superfund sites. In fact, they stopped cleaning up the Passaic River, which is poisoned by Agent Orange. And I think the reason he stopped the cleanup of the Passaic River is that Agent Orange is Russian code name. It's an old joke, but I like using it.
Well, it's proper in effect.
Yeah. But my point, it really cracked up Palone, by the way. But my point being that was bad and we got through it. Now he's unchecked. And now we have something else that gives them a bigger tool to really dismantle the environmental protections. Yes, they're going to have cutbacks and there's no oversight. They say they want to give everything back to the states, which is good in maybe, Vermont, but it's not going to be very good in Mississippi or Louisiana. But the other part has been the Chevron decision. The activist Supreme Court that gave Citizens United and said Trump can be immune also has basically said that the agencies like EPA does not have the presumption of validity and has equal standing to the polluters. So that'll be used as a way of saying we don't need EPA to check on the states. We don't need EPA to regulate business. It's going to become self-regulation and self-reporting, which will never happen. And I think it's really the dismantling of 55 years of environmental progress. And it's scary because the end game is the destruction of the planet. It's nothing. I mean, he's an existential threat, and so is Zeldin. And so by gutting EPA, and they will roll back the rules, they will roll back the standards, and we may go back to the old days where we have toxins rolling down the street. And so it's.
Well, what about the fact that they've already said that they want to repudiate their initial finding of climate change, of global warming?
Well, as I say, he's a climate denier.
Yes, that's it exactly. No joke.
And he says it's a hoax, and so is Zeldin. And they don't believe in science, and they deny science. I think they deny gravity. I mean, Trump's hair denies gravity. So, I mean, I think their mentality, they deny gravity. And so we only have a short period of time before the threats from climate change become real, and we won't be able to go back. And they're putting us in jeopardy, not only from climate change and the disasters that are coming and the more disasters, and they also want to roll back FEMA and get rid of NOAA and everything else that helps protect us. But it's going to actually have a bigger impact that hurts the economy and hurts people. And the politicization of disaster relief and everything else that's going to go along with it, we're heading into a very precarious time. I mean, I just used the example yesterday at the speech. They gave that nice young kid, a Secret Service badge, and has cancer, and yet they then he closes the cancer research in the federal government. Puts chemicals back on the market like Coral Pyrus, that was a Nazi nerve agent that causes kids to get brain cancer. It's the hypocrisy and the gall is one thing, but the damage and the danger that he will do to our communities, I think it's perilous. That if you live in an area like New Jersey that's so subject to sea level rise and storm surges and vulnerable to flooding, we're going to be in more trouble as they start filling in more wetlands. If you in a state like New Jersey, where most people live within 10 miles of a Superfund site, and we have toxic sites in our area, a lot of REPRA sites, as you know, and the failure to clean them up, and that impacting our community and pulling back clean air and clean water regulations, where we're going to be drinking more toxins and breathing in more pollution. EVs or electric vehicles are important for climate change, but they're more important in a city like Newark. If the buses and trucks are electric vehicles, then the kids won't be getting the same amount of asthma. The city of Newark, the hazardous air quality, we're talking about toxic chemicals in the air, like benzene, are 18 times the health-based standard. Electric vehicles will reduce that and maybe eliminate quite a bit of it. So it's all interconnected. And what we see in Donald Trump is and Zeldin is an overall threat. And also, the regions, as you know, always had some independence to be able to do things separately from headquarters. And I think they're going to rein that in as well, where even if you have a decent person in the region, they're going to be hand tied to, look, they hired two corporate lobbyists for the chemical industry to be head of chemical safety and EPA, and that just says it all.
Well, what is interesting is very accurate is your comment on the regions. There were certain, what I call the pro-Cheney forces in the Bush administration, Bush 43, George W. Bush, and they were much tougher on the environmental movement than the followers of George W. Bush. So I often, when I was dealing with headquarters, I played a forum shopping game. I would get behind me in terms of strong environmental policy, the Bush people as opposed to the Cheney people, and it seemed to work. But one thing that they never interfered with, and I heard something that confirms what you just said. they never got in the way of any enforcement action that I was taking. The Bush administration did not want to expand regulation, as many of us had hoped, particularly in terms of clean air interstate rule, and matters like that. But they never got in the way of any enforcement action. When I was working with you, for example, on the Passaic River, there were some pro-Cheney people at the EPA said, "Oh, what are you doing? What are you doing?" I said, "I'm enforcing the law." And then when things started going well with our endeavor, all of a sudden they wanted to come up and take credit for it. So that, but all right, that's politics.
Yeah, that's how it works.
But that I didn't have a problem with that. But I found it ironic, but that's a different story. But they never got in the way of any enforcement action that I would take or other regional administrators would take. But now I'm hearing rumblings that they will, as you mentioned, start to intervene when they feel enforcement actions are going too far. And Trump, being basically a puppet of the oligarchs, who are some of the worst polluters around, he will pursue this. I'm afraid the elimination of prosecutions. I think he'll pursue it with vigor.
Oh, absolutely. I think they'll try to prosecute the environmentalists who try to report things.
Yes, and the RAs, the regional administrators, will get fired.
Yeah.
Now, this is an election year in New Jersey.
Yep.
And I'm going to get on in a few minutes to your appraisal of how you feel it's going at the present time. But I want to ask you this. What do you think is either the major or a couple major environmental issues that are likely to come up in the course of this campaign?
Well, in New Jersey, I think there's environment is always there, whether the politicians want to talk about it or not, or ignore it, or whether the environmentalists push hard enough on it, because we will have a flood. We will have a toxic mess somewhere. We will have a garbage dump or incinerator catch fire. We will have some kind of chemical spill. So it'll always sort of be there. But I think that one of the issues that's going to be facing this election, and I'll use this as an example, is that we're being impacted every day by climate change, sea level rise, and chronic flooding. We have to raise the Parkway down around Tuckerton and Mullica, and we're going to have to raise it for about 10, 12 miles going across the Mullica. It's going to cost $2 billion. We're going to have to raise Route 46 and parts of Route 80. We have sewer plants that we have to armor plate because of flooding. We have a lot of vulnerable infrastructure in houses. Also, we need to do mitigation for sea level rise by creating new wetlands, and and also opening up stream corridors in inland areas so that they flood and restore the stream corridors and the buffers to help absorb pollution and to have areas of flood. It's going to be very expensive. So the question is, are taxpayers going to pay, or can we get the polluters to pay? There's a bill that friends of mine are working on, and I've been helping quietly on, basically creating it's like a Superfund bill for climate change, like a natural resource damages that the polluters who are causing the damage need to pay money. And it doesn't come from raising the gas tax; it comes from corporate. And as you know, the price of gas is set, regionally or wide. But to get them to start putting up money to start doing some of the work that we need to do on resiliency to make our state help deal with these problems. I think that's one issue that will always be there. I think clean water is always going to be a big issue in New Jersey. We have PFAS in wells and in water systems throughout the state. I think something like a third of the wells in New Jersey are showing signs for it. We have reservoirs that are having real pollution problems from runoff and blue-green algae, the HAPS algae. So water is always going to be an issue. Air pollution is going to always be an issue because we have very bad air quality in parts, and and sprawl. People are tired of seeing the last pieces of their open space being chewed up, and New Jersey is the most densely populated state. It's denser per square mile than China or Japan or India. You could fit all of California. I mean, you could fit all of California's population in the LA County region and still have 2/3 of the state left over if California was built at our density. I would say the only thing denser than New Jersey are the legislators that don't get it.
Well, they won't like to hear you say that,
Yeah,
but you
but
can say that in
but
this
they
show.
used to be. But my point is, I think those are the issues that sprawl and overdevelopment. Having, look, we have a massive problems with our parks. They're falling down. We're not investing in them. There's a $700 million backlog in repairs. The battle to save Liberty State Park from privatization. But I think open space and development, air pollution, water pollution, toxics, and climate change are all there. They're not going to go away. And New Jersey. Um, a long time ago, someone said about New Jersey, I can't remember if it was Jim Florio or not, said that wherever this country is going to go on the environment, New Jersey is going to get there first because we're going to see the problems first.
Well, that's true because the problems are really in our face. Let me ask you something that may not qualify as major of a problem as those you've mentioned, but I always found this difficult in terms of intergovernmental workings, and that was the issue of combined shore overflows when you had the water system and it would get to a point where it was intermixed with the sewer system. And it was always difficult for me to get the cooperation of mayors, and that had to do with both political parties. How much of an issue is that still? It was a vexing issue for me.
It's still a major issue. I mean, there's some work being done in Jersey City and Bayonne, but it actually is not only a pollution problem; it's a health issue because you have raw sewage going out into streams and rivers, or
Yes.
floating into the streets or into people's basements. We used to have a place, and it was a name of a group called the Fountains of Wayne. Well, every time it rains, we have the Fountains of Patterson, where at the ends of the streets, you see sewage being sprayed into the air, heading to the river. And it's still a major issue from water quality, but also a major issue from health for the people who live in those cities.
What I found is that it was easier to get cooperation from mayors and members of Congress for air pollution than it was for water. And I used to discuss this with Jim Florio.
Mm-hmm.
He had suggested, and I could have supported this if it was politically feasible. He had suggested a national bonding system where you would have certain taxes dedicated to clean water,
Mm-hmm.
because the cost of the new water infrastructure, as I recall, and I finished at EPA in 2009, it was something like a $500 billion.
Oh yeah. I forget what New Jersey's is. We had the numbers at one time. I don't really remember how much we needed, but it was in the $15 billion range for CSOs alone.
Just for New Jersey.
Just in New Jersey. And then you got to throw in upgrading our water treatment systems, our sewer plants, and it's a very expensive. And part of the problem for the mayors, and I'm not here to defend them, is that we can get grants and we can get low interest loans to fix CSOs, but the cost is expensive. And for many of the cities, it's actually too expensive to be able to write the grants because you have to have engineering plans to get the grants in the first place. So you might have to spend $250,000, $300,000 just to apply for the funding in the first place, which they may not have. And one of the things that we've always pushed for, and the state's getting better, that will give you zero interest loans, is to give the cities the grants to do the engineering work and apply, give them direct money so they could do the engineering work and apply for the grants they need to do the work. We have to fix the system we have. It's been broken. We've always supported, or I always did, a water fee to go into fixing infrastructure. Also a fee on plastic bottles.
Well, how would the water fee be paid? Who would it be assessed against?
It would be basically assessed against all users. It would be relatively small, but per user. But it would add up. And then the other was,
you could bond off that stream,
and you could bond off of it because it's pretty much guaranteed. And the other was to put a 10-cent fee on plastic bottles for recycling, and whatever doesn't get collected goes into fixing water. And it'll be it'll be millions of dollars a year. I mean, it's not going to fix the problem, but at least we have to do something, because a lot of it comes down to two things: political will and money, and they're tied together. I always said New Jersey will fix its environmental problems when we get the Stem Cell Research Center built to develop spines for legislators.
I think that's an accurate statement. It may be humorous, but it's also accurate. Now, the election is coming up this fall. You are known to be an environmental activist who also is a good judge of what's going on in campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take both parties, particularly with the environmental perspective. How do you see the two things about the Democratic Party? How do you see the relative standing of the candidates now, and also the relative stances of the candidates in terms of the environment.
Well, I also want to preface it with what's happening. So under Murphy, the DEP is in really bad shape. He's cut our budget almost every year. Some years the legislature puts more money back in. There's about 400 to 500 less staff in DEP than under Chris Christie. The budget's down about 20% from Christie. Under Christie, the parks backlog was 400 million. It's now 750. So we have real serious institutional problems. We've lost a lot of key staff. They've retired. They don't like LaTourette. When LaTourette became commissioner, 30 senior staff members put in their papers that day. And he's the first DEP commissioner in history that was a lobbyist and lawyer for chemical polluters before he went to DEP. Not even Chris Christie did that. And so DEP has a lot of problems. We've gotten rid of the Division of Enforcement. It's now an office under the commissioner, which makes it political. They just rolled back groundwater standards. The NRD program, Natural Resource Damages, it's supposed to collect money from polluters for damaging the environment. They're not collecting any. They're letting them off the hook. Murphy talks about now streamlining permits for development, which is, a big battle I had, back with Senator Sweeney and in the McGreevey days with the Permit Extension Act that you know about quite well.
I remember that because I sent a letter. Boy, did I get flack on this, but thanks to your advice, I did the right thing.
Yeah, you did. You helped a lot. And the point I'm making is,
my point is, though, that I could not believe the flack I got from legislators who thought that these permits just had to be extended regardless of their impact on the environment.
Right.
I never forgot that.
Right. Anyway, so we have these issues, that are going on within the department. Plus, we have the issues of sea level rise and climate change. The governor set some ambitious goals, 100% electric sales by 2035. Well, when I wrote the California Car Bill in 2004, our goal for 2025 was 330,000 vehicles. The governor they got rid of the sales tax exemption, and they've cut they put that $250 fee on each electric vehicle, and we haven't put the money into charging stations. New Jersey, if you go by electric vehicle per charging station, we're 50th in the nation. We don't have enough charging. And so we have 200,000 electric vehicles approximately now. We're supposed to have 330. So we're falling behind. So the point I'm making is the governor has created ambitious goals on climate change, but he hasn't, we were supposed to get to 100% renewable by 2035, but we don't have the means to get there. So a lot of these issues, whether it's electric vehicles or climate change, reducing greenhouse gases, fixing parks, is all going to be thrown off to the next governor. So whoever gets elected, it's going to be critical, because with the Trump administration rolling back protections at the national level, we need the state of New Jersey to be the safeguard and the guardrail and the backstop against what they're doing. We have in New Jersey control of clean water. Well, if we're weakening our clean water rules like we just did on groundwater, then we're not going to be able to stop the Trump rollbacks. We need to have a strong DEP commissioner and strong enforcement of our environmental laws to prevent what's happening at the national level from causing more flooding and more pollution here in New Jersey.
All right, now I'm going to put your neck on the line.
So, okay.
Not in a bad way.
Yeah.
In terms of let's take the Democrat side first. Mm-hmm. In terms of the candidates on the Democrat side, do you think that there's any candidate who is stronger on the environment than others, or a candidate that is weaker on the environment than others? Give me your assessment on that.
Sure. I'll give you my assessment. Well, I've worked with Steve Fulop for a lot of years on the environment. He fought when Christie rolled back the Highlands standards on septics that would allow more pollution. He fought that. He's done a lot of work in Jersey City on climate change and on parks and greenways. Also, I worked with him in closing the dirty coal plant in Jersey City. So he has an environmental record and cares about the environment. And I think he's, kind of like McGreevey. If he sees that it's right and it politically will help him, he will do it. So I worked with him a lot. I worked with Ras Baraka a lot too on Newark and fighting the Newark incinerator and fighting the power plant. And then when Cory Booker was trying to create a water utility and then try to sell it off. I worked with him in blocking that. I also worked with Don Payne and others on it too. And he cares a lot about the environment. So I see him as someone who cares a lot.
I feel that he's the one candidate in terms of environmental legacy,
Mm-hmm.
really has one because of what he did to replace the lead service lines.
Right.
That was a remarkable political accomplishment because he got Joe DiVincenzo involved with bonding. I think it was one of the most impressive things
no,
I
was
ever
going to
saw a
mention
mayor do.
that was part of it too. And so, Gottheimer, I know he's done some good stuff on lead and this and that, but he's not really big on New Jersey stuff, and he's not going to be a leader. Senator Sweeney, I fought with him. I've worked with him. He's done some bad on the environment. He's very pro pipeline and gas. On the other hand, he's also very pro renewable energy. I mean, I can work with him. I don't see him as an environmental champion. Sean Spiller, I know very well. We work together on the board of Work Environment Council. He's a good environmentalist. He cares a lot. I'll say that. And then you have Mikey Sherrill, who, and I'm going to be fairly frank, I don't see her understanding or knowing New Jersey environmental policy. I've talked to her on the national issues, and she really doesn't know them. Most of the time when I try to talk to her on the environment, she keeps talking about the Gateway Tunnel and transportation. She won't, she has not taken a strong position against fracking and other things. And in a debate, she talked about the need to do, regulatory rollback and speed up permitting and things like that, which to me is always that code word for cutting environmental standards and programs.
Absolutely.
So I'm very cautious about her. I'm cautious about Sweeney, but I know I can work with him. But I think that, that the two, as I mentioned earlier, who I think have the best potential on the environment are probably Roz and Steve Fulop.
Now let's talk about the Republican side. Because of the influence of Trump, well, first of all, John Bramnick, who I think would be satisfactory on the environment, but I don't give him a chance of winning the nomination.
Well, I'll say something about John because I've known him a long time. He used to be really excellent on the environment. He was one of the best Republicans. He was like Bateman. And then as the Republican Party started moving to the right, he started distancing himself. It was okay. He cared about the environment, but he was no longer a leader, and he stopped sticking his neck out. And I think that's because of how the Republican Party has kind of shaped. Though I think he would, if he was elected, I thought that, just like I thought Kim Gadana would actually be a fairly good governor because she actually cared about the environment. She used to come up to me and say, "Don't blame me for what Christie's doing." Anyway,
well, that was true.
I know. She actually asked me to go talk to the Pope and get her absolved from Christie's climate policy. I said,
"Jeff, you and I are Jewish. How the hell do we go to the Pope?"
Because she said he's one of you. He cares about the environment. That was her response to me. And so, Bramnick, I think, would be okay. I worked very well with Jack Chitterelli when he was in the assembly, and we worked together on a bunch of issues on open space and water and sprawl. Though I'm, concerned that being Republicans that are so afraid of the Trump, their shadow because of Trump and what Trump's going to do, that will they have any chance at all to even stand up or do anything? And so even though I think Jack is someone you could work with, will he be able to, or will he want to, or will he be afraid of?
Well, I'll tell you this much. I think they're going to have a tough time. As you and I both know, the various state environmental authorities, they can only do so much. A lot of these problems are interstate in nature.
Right.
And if you have an EPA that really doesn't give a hoot about these problems and is looking to roll, their big word is rollback, it's going to make it murder for DEP and other state agencies. And
the other point I'll mention is that, people don't realize that we get a lot of water from New York and Pennsylvania. 3 million New Jerseyans get their water out of the Delaware, and that water is by state. So if federal laws get weakened and Pennsylvania does wrong and New York does wrong, we end up drinking it. Same thing, the reservoirs in Bergen County and, in Passaic County, they get a lot of their water coming down from Orange and Rockland County on the Ramapo River or the Hackensack River. So what happens on the other side of the border affects us. So yeah, not having an EPA to regulate that, and right now we have decent governors in both states, but what if that changes? So yeah, the EPA is sort of the cop on the beat. Their presence keeps people in line, even if they don't see it. People know there's somebody that may be watching, and so they tend to be more careful.
Well, let me talk about one issue where you and I have been on the same side, but Donald Trump is about to destroy the initial progress that has been made, and that's on the issue of congestion pricing for motor vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
I have to tell you, everyone thinks that this is something that emerged overnight. We were planning for this all the way back in the 1990s when I was in state government
Right.
at the Meadowlands. And when I went to EPA in the year 2005, it was something that was forecast as the ultimate solution to bad air quality, not only in New York City, but that bad air in New York City from automotive activities doesn't stop at the Hudson River. It flows over to New Jersey
Right.
and creates the worst airshed you could find.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that in just a month that we've had congestion pricing, I know it's working. I go to New York all the time. Traffic in New York has absolutely been reduced very appreciably. I can't believe it. And at times at night when I would be in a vehicle in Manhattan, it used to be not gridlock, but it was crowded at every street corner. It's been reduced substantially. And I was very disappointed in Governor Murphy for opposing this, which for what I feel was just political reasons.
I think it's about taking care of the wealthy who go in and out of New York, because the average person in New Jersey who works for a living, unless they go off hours, they take the express buses that go in, they take mass transit, they take the PATH, they take New Jersey Transit, and they need to be improved. Our bus system, their buses are old. We need to put in bus rapid transit, especially through Bergen County to get into the tunnels. We need to expand light rail. I mean, Bergen-Hudson light rail still doesn't go to Bergen County. We need to basically put money into fixing and the PATH tunnels and the Gateway Tunnel, which is going to take years. One of the projects that I always thought New Jersey should do, and I can tell you this has been something I've been talking with people about for 30 years, is to extend the 7 line from the west side of Manhattan to Secaucus, so that we could get direct access not only to Hudson Yards, but to the east side of Manhattan, which we're not going to get for a long time because, right now Gateway is not even looking at extending, to the east side of Manhattan now or forever. And also for me as a Met fan to be able to take the subway right from Secaucus to Citi Field. But
I would do the same thing.
But that's the kind of project that we could be doing together if we joined in with New York on congestion pricing. My problem with Phil Murphy is that it's short-sighted, and he was playing politics with it because he's also was going to raise the gas tax and the tolls for other purposes. So he didn't want to have that on him. But had New Jersey been involved from the beginning with it, and we got a certain percentage of the money coming here, especially since from the riders, we could be using that money to upgrade our systems, as well as getting off the streets. I mean, yes, everybody, I talk to, I have cousins in New York, and they can go bike riding in the village without having to walk their bikes now, because there's actually enough room, even with they have bikeways, but the cars there's so much traffic, you can't even move, that they can ride around. So it's a policy and a program that's working. And unfortunately, our governor played politics over it. And now we have Donald Trump, who would just be against it because anything that he thinks is for the environment, he's going to oppose.
Well, it's going to take litigation. I'm hopeful that there may be a satisfactory outcome on the litigation, but I don't know that for certain. I can't predict that.
Right.
About the 7 line, I think that's a very desirable project. My question of you is this. Since it's part of I guess the subways are being part of New York MTA, how does that get financed on the New Jersey side? And is New Jersey able to cede jurisdiction so they can expand that line?
Well, yes, they can. I mean, remember New Jersey Transit runs rail lines into Orange and Rockland County.
Right.
So yes, they can. I think the biggest problem in the region is we have too many people playing with their own sets of choo-choos. We have PATH, we have MTA, we have we have New Jersey Transit, we have basically then you have LIE, you have Metro North, we need to have one system that's coordinated so that we can run trains from Trenton to Montauk, from Bayhead to Poughkeepsie. We need to get over all this jurisdictional crap and work together. But yes, they could run it right out. In fact, they're extending the 7 train now, and they're getting closer to the river. To bring it across would not be that expensive, and it could be done a lot cheaper and a lot quicker.
Well, it's being expanded to the west side of Manhattan,
Right, and from there, and from what I'm saying, from to Hudson Yards, and from there to cross the river becomes shorter and shorter to get to Secaucus. And my point being that, had we been part of it, that would be the kind of project that we could be that the MTA could fund that would benefit New Jersey, and I'm sure there's others that New Jersey could use itself.
No, I agree with you on that. The environment nowadays, you just can't. The state cannot be a sole actor. There's got to be interstate cooperation,
right?
And that often involves political conflict. But the environment has to take precedence over politics. The advantage I always saw with you is you were aware of the environmental obstacles, but you were also aware of solutions that could manage these obstacles. Because otherwise, when people say, well, that's political. You can't have a successful environmental agenda, in my view, without having a political game plan.
When people say I'm an environmentalist, I'm not political, that's being political, and you're neither at that point, because if you don't meld the two together, then you'll never get anything done.
I agree.
A lot of these, as I said earlier about the Zoom share, where they want to, the one thing always gets me, we're going to do this, we're going to work on this plan, we're going to work on this plan, whether it's the water supply master plan or whatever. If you don't have an implementation strategy for that plan, a plan without implementation is a hallucination.
Well, I'll close with this. I grew up in a suburb of Pittsburgh. Right across the river from where I lived was one of the most famous environmentalists of all time, Rachel Carson. She lived in Springdale. And living in the Pittsburgh area, when I was a small child, things improved over the years. It would get dark about 4:00. The smoke in Pittsburgh was unbelievable from the steel mills. But Pittsburgh more or less solved that problem over the years. And I'm convinced that if Pittsburgh and the suburbs were able to deal with these issues, I think we can do the same thing in New Jersey. At least that's my hope.
And I would just add that I've always been a believer that green equals green, that you can make money and protect the environment. Recycling can make money. It's not making as much now, but investing in green technologies, investing in clean water, they all save money. Look, on climate change, the health impact to this country on climate change on a yearly basis is about $880 billion. How many kids in Newark have asthma because of air pollution? How many new diseases are we getting, like Lyme disease, because the climate's getting warmer? So the more we invest in the environment, we can also create jobs, whether it's on mass transit or solar systems or retrofitting houses to be more efficient. Not only you can make money, you can save money, and you can save the environment. It works together. It's not environment versus economy. It's all together. A good economy with an unhealthy environment is not a good economy.
I agree with that completely. And Jeff Tittel, it was a pleasure, but also very informative to have you on our podcast tonight. I hope you will come back again as we get into environmental. I think we're going to get into environmental crises with this administration. And I think your being on the show gives the public information and enables them to make a considered decision in favor of the environment. So I thank you very much. I thank our engineer, Dr. Jonathan Yaris. I call affectionately as Doc. This has been a very good show. And Jeff, all the best to you. I know you're retired now, but you're still active with the movement. Yeah. And I hope you never retire from the movement.
I don't think they'll let me, but thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you for being here. That concludes tonight's broadcast of the Dynamic Political Centrism podcast. We're living in a time of crisis. Our approach is compromise, consensus, and consideration. And we do strive to get solutions. And that has been really the hallmark of Jeff Tittel's career, trying to forge solutions that could be accommodating, but at the same time, protect our environment. That concludes our show. We will have a few very informative shows coming up over the next 2 weeks. we will be getting out notices of that. And that concludes our show. And Jeffrey Tittel, once again, thank you very much. And all of you have a good week. We're living in an American time of chaos and crisis, but I think that the Supreme Court decision today gives us hope that the court at long last, in spite of the stupid dissent that was filed by Judge Alito, I think that wisdom will prevail and that finally the court will take its role in curbing the excesses and the outright fraud and misfeasance and malfeasance of Donald Trump. Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for the latest edition of Dynamic Political Centrism. Check back each week for our newest episodes, and you can catch past episodes online via YouTube and Spotify, and please subscribe to our Substack.